name is Alyssa.
And I'm Tony.
And we are the Soultry Sisters. We're a community-based organization that empowers women to live healthy and creative lives in North County, San Diego, and recently, DC.
We curate events, workshops, mixers, and meetups centered around women's arts, wellness, and sisterhood.
Our mission is to empower women to live vibrant and shine bright through creative expression and conscious holistic living.
Our vision is to create a safe space that provides women the arts and wellness resources that are affordable and accessible.
So far, we've partnered with Dancing Soul Boutique, Village Rock Shop, Carlsbad Village Yoga Co-op, and nonprofit organization Leap to Success. To find out more information about us and to sign up for our future events, visit soultrysisters.com.
You can also find us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Soultry Sisters.
We hope to see you soon.
Hey, welcome back, y'all, to week 3 of our September book club series.
Yes, so happy to see y'all again. We are back. So we are starting with checking in. So as we check in, let us know where you are tuning in from and what you are sipping on. I got a double fister for y'all today. I'm tuning in from San Diego and I'm drinking H2O and cranberry juice, y'all.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
no variation, not cran apple, cran mango, cran grape, just straight cran, y'all.
Nice. So, hey, y'all, I'm tuning in from Washington, D.C., and I'm drinking 2 beverages, too. So I have my water in the tall cup, and in this cute little cup, again, all these new things in my new apartment, and my clear glass mug is my sparkling lemon flavored water. So it's not tea because it's still warm enough to have a cold beverage, but it's cute.
It is really cute. I got to experience the other version of your glass without the little handle, but it's definitely cute. We got Shanta checking in from Oceanside, drinking water. Cheers. Yes, stay hydrated. So if you're new here, we are having our Soultry Hangout, and this month we are focusing on friendship. So for the month of September, we always talk about themes around soul sustainability. And what greater way than talking about how we sustain our relationships. So if you're new here, that's what we're working on. That's what we're talking about. And we are focusing on reading the book Platonic. We love to bring extra resources to have our community discussion. So for our book club this month, we're reading Platonic, How the Science of Attachment Can Help You Make and Keep Friends.
Yeah, so go to our website, soultrysisters.com/book club to learn more and know what book we're reading next. You can always comment or DM us what book you all recommend for us to read. We love getting your recommendations. So let us know, because we have this week and next week left of our September series. And then we'll move on to a new book.
Yes. Speaking of things coming up, we have some upcoming events. We have our Soul Flow. So this past Sunday, Tony taught a yummy yoga soul flow that I personally needed. She always does this beautiful reading that really grounds us in our intention for the practice. So the next one I'll be teaching in October. And then we have some other things, some in-person events, y'all. Tony's going to be in town, and we're going to have, she's going to be in town because you want to talk about the premiere, Tony?
Yeah, so in the spring, we filmed with Out of the Boondocks, which they do a docu-series with KPBS in San Diego to highlight different Filipino creatives in our city. And we were selected for one of the creatives to highlight for season 2. So it premieres this October for Filipino History Month. And so we're really excited to have the premiere or to attend the premiere. And then Friday, October 13th, is our community event, the community screening for the premiere. So if you're like, oh, what is this? Go to our website and you can learn more and join us. The premiere, the community screening is free on October 13th. And our episode will be streaming. So it's going to be really exciting. And then since I'm there, we're like, might as well celebrate Halloween early. So we're having our Y2K themed Renaissance Twerk or Treat social So we'll have Sierra DJing. So she was the DJ for our Friday mixer of our annual festival this year. And we're just going to have fun dressing up. We're going to have a photo booth with a special backdrop with all the Y2K vibes. And you don't want to miss it. So the BOGO Bring a Sis deal has 9 tickets left.
9 tickets left.
For those who want to bring a sis. We can also get tickets, just a general ticket. So yeah, we'll see you there.
Yes, we'll see you there. And if you're loving all the things we're doing, if you're enjoying our Soultry Hangouts, if you're enjoying our Walking Challenge, our Soulful series, and you want to make sure that we can continue to bring you all these arts and wellness events, please consider donating and supporting. You can donate to support our work on Venmo and PayPal at Soultry Sisters. So that's just an invitation. If you're like, you know what, I want to see more of the Soultry Sisters, I want them to continue to do what they're doing, please consider donating and supporting. Another way to support, share this link, share what we're doing. You can likes, comments, subscriptions. Those are way to donate your time as well.
Yes, and we've been seeing that the last 2 episodes of this book club, people have been watching the replay, so that's awesome. And we just want you all to continue getting whatever you need out of it and to share with other folks, because again, we're reading a book about friends, so who isn't going to benefit from this discussion? So we're really excited to have you all here for part 3. And I just want to shout out Rio in the comments. So Rio is a part of Out of the Boondocks, and she was the one who interviewed us for our episode that's going to premiere in October. So definitely check out of the Boondocks. You can learn more at our website.
So shall we get into it? All right. So if you have the book, you can grab your book. We're going to be reviewing chapters 5 and 6 today. If you are just listening on your walk, you can also listen along as a podcast. So whether you have the book, you can grab it, grab your notes. We're going to want to have a interactive discussion. We're going to want to hear from you in the comments. So here we go.
Yeah. So this week is part 3 of our book club. So we're talking about pursuing authenticity and harmonizing with anger. So last week we covered, being vulnerable, and what does that look like? And so now we're like, okay, now we understand kind of what vulnerability is like. What does it mean to now be our true selves? That's all what chapter 5 is about.
So we talk about chapter 5, we're talking about authenticity. So we always want to start our community discussion with talking about how we define something. So what does authenticity mean to you? What does it look like? Let us know in the comments. We have Kyle saying, I'll be watching the replay for tonight, checking in from DC and drinking watermelon juice. Looking forward to catching this great discussion. Yes, of course, y'all can always catch our replays. Okay, we got a comment. Not fake. Exactly. Authentic. Not fake.
Right? Like real. Yeah, I feel like before this book, I probably would think, authenticity, it's like real. I also think of like when people have like designer purses and they have that like little paper that comes with the bag, that's like the authenticity of the bag. So yeah, I think of like when people are like real or to verify like something true nature, I guess, like someone's true nature.
Yeah, verified. When you got that blue check mark, verified account, authentic.
And then Rio shares egolessness. Interesting, right? So being authentic is having, or I guess without ego, or I guess big ego.
So the definition that was shared in the book is owning one's personal experiences, be they thoughts, emotions, needs, wants, preferences, or beliefs. So it's an ownership of your personal experience. I was like, ooh, ownership. Authenticity equals the owning of whatever it is you got to share. So I was like, okay, I like that. And then to support that, the other quote that was shared to kind of further give us a deeper definition is acting in accord with the true self, expressing oneself in ways that are consistent with inner thoughts and feelings. To me, that's like that keep it real, being not fake, like aligning what's in your mind with what you're saying out loud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. I feel like I do really appreciate like them using the word like ownership. So it's like, yeah, it's not only the act of being real, but it's really like owning that, like, this is who I am. And I like the part too, the acting in accordance. So it's like that integrity is really important. I think of like when you think of someone who's showing up authentically, it's like you kind of know what to expect or show up that way consistently, right? I feel like authentic isn't like, oh, one day you're going to get pasta from this restaurant and then tomorrow you're going to get a taco and the next day you're getting ice cream. Like for an authenticity, you want, to kind of know what is expected of that experience, and then with people of that person. Yeah.
I also feel like, yeah, exactly. Like, what to expect. And I feel like sometimes keeping it real, not being fake gets, and then she talks about this in the book, gets linked to just saying it like it is and like being mean, like telling someone the truth, because like truth hurts. But as we learn in the chapter, that's not necessarily true. So it's interesting how she takes the time to like separate rawness from authenticity. So to be raw is like, what I'm thinking is to share your feelings with no filter, and to be authentic is to share your feelings and emotions with a filter, with intention.
Yeah, I think authenticity is really, yeah, that intention. And yeah, she makes a distinction of like, yeah, being raw. A lot of people use that as an excuse rather to be mean and to just do whatever they want. And then they're just like put their hands up, like, oh, well, that's just me being raw. And I think a lot of people also then connect that to their personality. I feel like a lot of people would rather, like, more people probably say, oh, I'm just like a raw, real person than saying like, oh, I'm an authentic person. I don't think as many people like label
Yeah.
themselves as authentic,
Well,
but I think people label themselves as raw because they think that's like
mm-hmm.
the best thing. I feel like especially on these like reality shows and stuff, people are like, oh, I just tell it like it is. And it's like, well, you're actually disregarding like other people's feelings and you're
Yeah.
being like insensitive actually.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back. So this chapter, y'all, these two chapters really made me think back to when we read Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. We were talking about emotions, and in that book, she talks about how the three emotions that we're able to display is happy, sad, and angry. And so like those, and to me, those three emotions in its raw form, like you can tell when someone's happy, sad, or angry. Sad, crying; angry, yelling; happy, laughing, like raw. But authentic to me sounds like, what are those emotions that are in between? Maybe not as clear, maybe not as, it's more nuanced. And so that's kind of helped me realize too, like the difference between feeling an extreme emotion, aka rawness, and like letting that be, or also allowing ourselves to have this kind of nebulous, not even nebulous, because it's still authentic is being defined and clear. It's just allowing ourselves to maybe feel two things at once.
Yeah, and I think she's more so talking about rawness being used in like the extreme state of like
Right.
disregarding other people's feeling, like, because yeah, you can have these different feelings and emotions and thoughts, but she's just saying like when it comes to interpersonal dynamics like friendships, it's important to consider another person's feelings, especially when then the next chapter will talk about anger. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's what she's kind of talking about, is more so just highlighting that it can be a negative thing, and then you can actually use your feelings and your emotions and your experiences to positively benefit your relationships.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like what Shanta's saying here. Someone said they appreciated me being blunt, and I corrected them and said that I'm direct. Blunt is truth, but
Mm-hmm.
rude. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she adds, yeah, some people say I'm just being real, but sometimes it is rude. Yeah, I feel similar. Like, I feel like I'm a very direct person, but yeah, I feel like a lot of people don't process directness well. They So they kind of just want people to, you know, beat around the bush or kind of say like something really sweet first and then say like the direct statement. But I think sometimes it is helpful to just be direct. But yeah, direct doesn't have to mean rude or raw or blunt. Like it's I feel like they're all different when you think about like how it's delivered. I think it's the delivery. It's like we can all think the same thing. It's just how are you delivering that, especially in this context of the book, it's in friendships, right? It's like if you care about this person, you might want to, you know, deliver it in a way that's helpful for both parties.
And that segues into the next topic or segue into authenticity and safety. So I feel like to be able to receive feedback or give feedback authentically, one needs to feel safe. And the quote I wanted to share is, authenticity occurs when we access feelings of safety, when we don't feel the need to activate our defenses, even in the face of threat, judgment, rejection, or neglect, among other things. It is who we are when we are not triggered, when we can make intentional rather than, hold on, I lost this quote. We can be a intention rather than reactive decisions about how we want to show up in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another quote is like, you know, when one authenticity blooms in safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another quote I wanted to share was she's talking about, you know, why authenticity correlates to safety. And so Dr. Franco shares that people feel most authentic when all their psychological needs are met, when they feel more competence, belonging, and self-esteem. And again, these words are things that we kind of learned and defined with Atlas of the Heart from Brené Brown last fall. So it's kind of nice to have another book that kind of dives into those emotions as well. But yeah, I think it's important when she mentions like when our psychological needs are met, right? That's when we feel authentic. And I think that is a kind of a good indication of like if we're trying to figure out if, you know, we're in a right, like if we belong in a certain group or a place, a space is for us. It's like, okay, do I feel like all of my needs are met? Do I feel like I belong? Do I feel like I have good self-esteem here? And I think that's something that we journey through like across our lives. But I feel like especially when we're early ages, I feel like those things are really important because I think like especially on TV and movies and stuff, you see examples of friendships where like you're like, okay, that person's needs are not being met. Like, why are they with those people? Like I remember watching the show Girls and just being like, none of their needs are being met. Not any of those characters. Like they're just like, I guess like trauma bonded or whatever, like deciding to be together, even though they don't have this safety, this authenticity. So this chapter really helped. I was like reflecting on different pop culture, like movies and things that I remember watching, especially when I was younger, and kind of reflecting and being like, oh yeah, those negative relationships I would see portrayed on TV that didn't have these core elements.
Yeah, y'all, when I think of this too, authenticity and safety when it comes to friendship, Mean Girls. Mean Girls.
I wrote that down in my notes. It was in the part. We'll get to that in a second, but I guess I can pull it up now since we're talking about it. But she talks about ingratiation. So she mentions how ingratiation is when you're just like doing things to please a person to get on their good side. So that could be, hold on, let me just pull it up because there was like a specific example that I was like, this is literally Mean Girls.
Yeah.
And she put, so Dale Carnegie encourages us in the book How to Win Friends, Influence People, right? That's a popular book on all these like must-read lists across the world, I think. So he encourages us to ingratiate. So that means smile at people, use their name, get people to talk about themselves, make them feel important. And she says that this isn't bad advice per se, but it's manipulative. So she says ingratiation is, so instead of ingratiating, we must do the internal work of building security so warm behaviors flow from us naturally. And then she says inauthenticity, like ingratiation, sabotages our friendships. and it can lead to depression and lower self-esteem. So yeah, I
Mhm.
literally wrote in here like Mean Girls example of Katie
Yeah.
Heron, because she literally decides that she just wants to ingratiate to Regina George and the clique, and then to like gets rid of like Janice and everyone else, because she's just like, oh, I want to be this cool girl now, regardless of like my original friends' feelings, or regardless of like anyone in the school. Like she ends up like being on everyone's burn list,
Right.
because she ends up being fake and manipulative, and people realize that even in high school.
Right.
So yeah.
Isn't it so interesting, y'all, how a movie like Mean Girls, like, oh my gosh, Mean Girls, like it's so coveted by folks. But when I think about, this book and good examples of like healthy friendships, this is a what not to do story. Like,
Well, I guess because there's like the two storylines. So it's like what she does with Regina George's group is like what not to do, and how she originally was with Janice,
right.
Ian, and Damien is what to do, right? She was
Yes.
authentically herself at
Yes.
first and all that, and then she chose to like go to the bad side. So yeah, I think it shows. I love that movie. That's like one of my favorite movies
Oh
ever.
yeah.
So it's like she has her turning point and stuff. But I think it shows those two roads you can go, right? You can go authentic, or you can ingratiate. And I think, again, for those coming of age movies, especially at that age in high school and your early adulthood, I feel a lot of people do feel they have to choose a path. And so, again, that's a great example of like what not to do. And then they do give you examples of what to do. And then,
yeah. And going back to like authenticity and safety, bringing that up, for me, this book made me, like this chapter made me reflect on and ask myself, how in what instances have I felt safe with a friend? Like, what did that look like? Where were we? It made me really think that like be less hard on myself of when I'm not showing up authentically. It's like, oh, why am I not being myself around this person? I'm like, oh, that's actually an indicator I don't feel safe. So it's like less of a judgment, because I tend to be, I come from the background of being hard on myself when I don't like someone. I feel bad when I don't like someone, versus with this authenticity chapter and safety, now it's making me realize, girl, maybe you're trying to protect yourself. Like, what is not safe in this friendship? What is preventing you from feeling safe? Is it the person? Is it the environment? Is it you? Is it your psyche? So this chapter really is allowing me, again, the metaphor to excavate truly what's at the root of my interactions, because I tend to be a person to feel bad when I don't like someone. I'm like, I should like everyone, but the authenticity is like, you don't have to, and there's reasons for that.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm a person that like can pretty early on tell like if I'm gonna vibe with someone or not. Like that doesn't mean I will stop trying to get to know them, but I can kind of soon tell if like I feel like if they're authentic or not. And I feel like with inauthentic people, I really don't mesh with. So especially people who are like, I don't know, some people who really try to like make themselves seem like something that you're like, we don't have to do that. Like some people are like, you're doing the most. Like we're just trying
doing
to chill. Or sometimes they're like, some people do want that ingratiation, so they'll just be like either like kind of love bombing with all these like compliments, or making it seem like they're really interested in something that you're interested in, and you're like, I feel like you don't really do that. And so I feel like I get those vibes from people a lot, like, oh, I don't feel like they're showing up authentically. Like I didn't really have that language before, but reading this chapter, I was like, oh yeah, I think when people show up inauthentic, I can feel that. And that's when I'm kind of like, oh, I don't think I'm going to hang out with them as much. And so that's something I feel like this chapter kind of went into, is like listening to ourselves when a friendship feels good, and listening to ourselves when it doesn't, right? Because that can be, like you're saying, a way to protect ourselves, or even for us to know like what truly feels good. Because I think when you're little, from what we talked about in previous weeks, when like you have that ease, that mere exposure effect to friends, maybe you didn't really get to choose who you were around, or sometimes with family you don't really get to choose, but with friends I think she's really like kind of honing in that like we have a choice that we can make, and if it's not feeling great, if it's not feeling safe, then it's okay that that's not something we want to keep diving into.
And that goes into this next quote too. of unlocking authenticity is about becoming more secure. And so I was like, ooh, I feel that, y'all. And I was like, how do I tell? Well, it's about becoming more secure. So it starts with the self. And authentic people, in feeling this bedrock of security, unearth the empathy and consideration that lie within us all. So part of being authentic is the practice of empathy, is having consideration for not only others, but ourselves. So for me, this chapter made me realize, how am I considering myself in my friendships? And that will contribute to my security and safety. I don't know. Let us know in the comments, is that what's coming up for y'all? Like, how are you leaning towards, we'll get into that later on too. We're going to talk about our attachment styles, but let us know if you feel, for the most part, safe in your friendships. Are you feeling like you can show up authentically? Let us know where you're currently at.
Yeah. And I also feel like when you mentioned, like considering ourselves, I think a lot of, I guess now people use the term like people pleasing, right? And that can, I guess, fall under like anxious attachment. But I feel like, if you're always just trying to make your friends happy or make the people you're around happy, you're not considering yourself. I think it's such an important thing for us to learn as adults, right? Is that we have to consider ourselves so we can pour into ourselves first. So then we can pour out into our friendships, into all the relationships that we have. So I feel like it's really important for us to learn those things. Like, even if we're learning as an adult, it's okay, but because that's going to help us get these like more healthy relationships, which goes into the next quote I wanted to share, which is secure people. See, again, talking about our attachment styles. So secure people are less consumed by their pain and are better at considering others, right? So maybe if you realize that, you're someone who in friendships, like, you're all about yourself and you don't really care about other people's problems. You're like, nope, you just need to show up to my, party. And I don't care if you have work, if you have your baby to take care of. Like, if maybe that's something to consider, that, okay, maybe you're not showing up secure in that situation. Or if, you're always, finding yourself not feeling that you're able to be considered, like be on the receiving end of considered, maybe you realize that some of your friends or the people you're around aren't showing up as a secure person.
Exactly. What's also coming up for me, we're on this about secure people being less consumed by their pain, and talk about people pleasing. I think secure people are less consumed by being liked. And so I feel like the person, like, think of like sometimes, like if you're hanging out with someone, I start to think about how I show up with a new friend. And I just went on a friend date last week, and it's like, I was thinking about, like, was I being authentic, and how was I feeling? Was I feeling safe? And I think when I feel most authentic is when I feel I no longer have to perform. Like, I'm a performer. When I don't feel safe, like Tony and I grew up as military kids. So we moved around like every 3 or 4 years. And every time I go to a new school, new dance studio, I felt like I had to perform to win friends. So how did I perform? I was funny. How did I perform? I was like really good at dancing. How did I perform? I was just like liking what everybody else was wearing. Like, oh, I like your shoes. I'm gonna get the same shoes you have. Like, I like your hairstyle. I'm aware. So for me, I realized, like, when I feel safe, I don't feel the need to perform. And that sometimes means they talk about the mask. James Baldwin talks about that mask. I really resonated with that as an artist, the drama sign, the 2 masks. So that's kind of what came up for me. I'm like, wow, like for me, my measurement, when I know I'm being authentic, when the mask is off and I'm no longer performing. So that might mean, y'all, I might be less funny. or my jokes might be more organic. So I said that and then I laughed. So
that makes sense. No, that makes sense. And I think, performing is like, can be an indicator of like, if you feel like you're being your true self. And again, when we're defining authenticity, this book, we define it as like being our true self, our highest self, things like that. And another point I want to make with this quote is, when we're talking about being less consumed by our pain, in the book, an example she was sharing with us was that two friends, that one just went through a breakup and was like very distraught and like sad that, she wants to contact her ex-boyfriend, but not sure. And just sharing with her friend that like her true authentic feelings is that she's sad, navigating how to communicate with this now ex-boyfriend. And her friend was like, why, they're on a trip, and she's like, why do you keep bringing this up? Like, you're being selfish, like you don't care about my feelings. But ended up being raw and just sharing it very more like aggressively, or just like in a non like
Compassionate.
compassionate way in a public setting. And so that example, I feel like, was showing how the friend who got upset, instead of considering the pain of the friend sharing a vulnerable thing, that like, oh, I went through a breakup and I'm really sad, and like, even though she kept bringing it up, like the friend could have more compassionately been like, hey, can we talk about something else? Or okay, we'll talk about for like 5 minutes, 10, whatever, and then can we like just go on to this excursion we have for the trip and not mention him then? So yeah, I feel like that example was showing how like a lot of times we don't communicate in friendships, and then you'll kind of like bottle it up, which we'll get into the next chapter. But like, you'll bottle up your frustration or something, and then it comes out in a non-compassionate way and you don't consider that other person's pain, because you're consumed in like, oh, I'm annoyed, and your pain or upsetness is now trumping your friend's like experience. So I thought that was a really important example of like, and she talks about this in the book, there's like multiple truths, right? It's not that her friend was wrong for bringing up her ex-boyfriend and the other friend wasn't wrong for being upset. It's just there's ways to go about that situation that doesn't end in this like big argument backlash that they didn't really get to ever really come back from, which was interesting as she went through the book. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting example.
That makes me think too, like when I was like reading that example, it's like, it's almost like one friend's pain hit a nerve pain of the other. Of like, okay, you're sad about not having that intimate moment anymore with your boyfriend, but here you are in an intimate setting on a vacation with me, and this is a chance we get to be together. So I feel like, to me, it's like, oh yeah, it's interesting how it's hard to see eye to eye when two people's pains are being like hit, If two people are in pain, it's hard to be there for the other. So yeah, that's interesting. And then Rio shares similar to what we were just talking about when it comes to how do we know when we'll be able to be authentic. She says, I feel most secure when I can still be an introvert and not for a fiend extroversion or be a people pleaser. Yes, which I do when I'm in uncomfy situations. I can relate.
Yeah, it's like when you're able to like be yourself, in whatever way that means for you. That's the friendships that feel good. And yeah, when I think about my friendships too, yeah, I'm able to like show up as myself. So yeah, with my friends, I'm more talkative, jokey, and all this stuff. And with like new people, I'm more quiet and reserved. So that's when I can kind of tell once I'm like close to someone, because I'm like, oh yeah, I'm like very chatty, or like I want to update them on a lot of stuff, or if like even then I want to be vulnerable, because then when it's like a more acquaintance friend, like I won't really talk about like the real stuff happening in my life. But if it's like a real close friend where I feel safe with, again, that safety, then I will be real and honest about like what's actually happening.
Yeah. It makes me think of too, like, when you're saying, at first you're quiet, I feel like, yeah, it's an okay thing to be quiet and reserved when you're first in a new situation, because we're all assessing if we're safe. And I used to feel like that was a bad thing. Like, I can't be quiet. Like, people don't like when I'm quiet. Like, I have to be happy. I have to be giddy. And so you saying that, like, I realized too, like, that's a way for me to assess. So I can give myself pause, give myself a beat, assess if you're safe, and then act accordingly. That's authentic, because you can say I am authentically like more playful when I'm safe versus not. And that goes into this next quote as authenticity doesn't always mean doing what we want or expressing what we think or feel. That's rawness. It means we are responsive rather than reactive, intentional rather than primal. It's like that survival mode, right? It's choosing behaviors that express who we are rather than being triggered to act in ways that don't. That supports also like Rio's comment.
Yeah, and Shanta left a comment. I kind of thought about the other side of that scenario, of the two friends where some people can't even be present. Yes, so Dr. Franco talks about that in the book of that, like, this authenticity in friendship really is about showing up and being present with the person you're with, and that's how you build these deeper, sustaining bonds.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, and I think we all have triggers, right? We talk about that in the book, but it's like, how do we respond? That's what she's saying with this quote versus then react, right? Like, so there will be things that are going to trigger us as humans. Like, we're all humans, we have a human experience, but it's how we respond to those. And we don't have to just tell our friend off right then and there in a public place. Very non-compassionate, but we can be like, oh, actually, and divert it in a way that feels good for both of you, that still considers each person's feelings, and how, still maintaining that love. I think that's also a part of it too, is like, even when these negative things come up that might trigger us, is still like kind of showing up with love, which kind of goes into the next quote I wanted to share. So, community is a group of people who have learned how to communicate honestly with each other, whose relationships go deeper than their mask of composure. And hold on, let me find the full thing.
As you pull that, I'm going to pull up.
Here, I have it.
Oh, okay.
Whose relationships go deeper than their mask of composure, and who have developed some significant commitment to rejoice together, mourn together, and to delight in each other and make others' conditions our own. Right? So, especially as Soultry Sisters, we're all about community, and that's what we are here to do. One of our purposes, to build these meaningful connections for our community. And I think that's kind of what we've experienced so far over the course of the last 4 years, is like being able to rejoice, to enjoy our festival with each other, kind of like a reunion every year. That's a delight, that fun, but also more. So even throughout the pandemic, we started these hangouts so we can like have a safe space for each other. We also have something called Soul Sessions, which is like a group mental health therapy session. So I just appreciate how she did define community, and how being authentic, and communicating and showing up in a way that's safe really does build this community that we all want.
Mm-hmm. What's coming up for me is community agreements. Like, how do we make a space safe? How do we make sure people feel like their needs are being met? I think of community agreements, and that goes also with responding to Shanta's comment. Some people really are always about their drama and actually selfish, yes, because they are in that insecure mode. So if you attract those people, it becomes hard to decide how to either set a boundary or be empathetic. And I agree. That's why for us, like as facilitators, as people who lead a community, that's why we have a community agreements. Like when you're stepping into this space, this is we're coming in with this intention. We're leaving out this. And I feel like community agreements doesn't only have to exist in group spaces. I think when we think of community agreements for ourselves, that's our values, right? And some other things. So I feel like for me, when I think about protecting my energy and making sure if I have a friend that is going through that example, it's about being fair to me, and also, and we'll talk about that in the anger one, actually. So the next chapter, actually, we'll talk more about that. But yes, we'll continue this discussion. But yes, it's a really important for us to have that community, and for that community to feel safe, we have to have those agreements on how we're going to show up. And then another thing that I really appreciated in this chapter was when she talked about defense mechanism scenarios, y'all. And this was great to figure out how when we're feeling those certain triggers, when we're feeling a certain way, how we can start to be more aware of ourselves. So if you're not familiar with the term defense mechanism, she shares a definition. The author, Dr. Franco, says defense mechanisms are strategies we use to reduce our awareness of and distance ourselves from something that we find threatening. defense mechanisms. And so let me go to that page 148. There's a whole list, y'all. She goes, here are some common uncomfortable feelings as well as the defense mechanisms we might use to protect ourselves. If we can't tolerate feeling inadequate, we may get defensive in conflict. If we can't tolerate our anger, we may act passive aggressively or aggressively. If we can't tolerate rejection, we may violate friends' boundaries. If we can't tolerate anxiety, we may try to control our friends. This one hit me. If we can't tolerate guilt, we may overextend ourselves with friends. That's me, y'all. Well, there's many on this list. I'm not going to tell you all of them, but if we can't tolerate if we can't tolerate feeling flawed, we may fail to apologize when warranted, blame others, or tell people they're sensitive or dramatic when they have an issue with us. If we can't tolerate sadness, we may avoid friends who need support. So there's many situations in the example that we were talking about from the book that this person could be responding to with their defense mechanism, with the less compassionate response. There's also projection. That's another defense mechanism. Projection occurs when we assume our feelings mean something about the person who provoked them rather than reflecting our own psyche. I thought that was really important. We talk about showing up authentically, knowing what's ours and what's someone else's. So those are things I wanted to bring up to the conversation. Do y'all feel like you relate to any of those defense mechanisms when it comes to authentically responding to a situation with a friend? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah, and she mentions that defense mechanisms may feel authentic because they happen reflexively, but as the definition suggests, they're a way to fog reality to escape a threatening feeling. So, right, if you're like, oh, that's what naturally comes up to me, just because it naturally occurs, she's saying doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy. It's just because that's your mechanism. That's what you've learned to cope, right, and how you learn to react. But she's saying that through this awareness, we can learn to be more responsive, right, than reactive.
There's another one. If we can't tolerate feeling unliked, we may act like someone we're not. That's that Mean Girls. So yeah, Go ahead.
The one I resonated with a lot was if we can't tolerate tension, then we may withdraw from friends instead of addressing problems. And then
there's a reason why there's a reason why I skipped over that one, but yes.
And that one goes into next chapter, anger. but yeah, it was just interesting. So I just really appreciate this chapter, really diving into what authenticity means. And how we can show up authentically too. So she gives practical ways of that we can self-reflect, and then how we can kind of move through these situations. So even those different scenarios that she brings up with the different friend dynamics, she'll give kind of at the end, a blurb of oh, Sarah could have said this instead. So I kind of appreciate that, because that in my head would help me kind of, mentally make sense of okay, if this situation happened, how would I respond? And then she would kind of give a way that's a little bit more a healthier option. So yeah, with this whole chapter on page 155, the quote I wanted to highlight was, authenticity nourishes friendship, right? So all these examples that we're sharing and all the different, parts of why we show up to do, it's how we can nourish our friendship. And I think that's what's really important for us to remember throughout all of this, because it can be hard, but it's important because this is what's going to help our friendships grow and thrive, and for us to sustain them.
Yeah. When you brought that quote too, I feel like when it thinks the quote why can I say this word? Authenticity nourishes friendship. It's, to me, authentic. Why am I having?
You want to drink some water?
I think I drank too much cranberry juice. Does cranberry juice have a side effect on your speech, y'all? Too much sugar? I forgot my train of thought, so we're gonna move on to authenticity.
Friendship. Yeah, I don't know.
um to authenticity and privilege. I thought this was a good one because y'all, during the pandemic, I did decide to end some friendships, and they talk about that too in these two chapters, like when to know when to walk away from a friendship, when to sustain and restore. And the quote I wanted to kind of root us in when we're talking about this topic of authenticity and privilege is the latitude to be your authentic self and to have people receive you that way rather than through the caricature of stereotypes. Privilege means access to authenticity. So I thought this was really important because as Black and Filipina, like being raised and growing up in mixed environments, being military kids, we're always changing where we are. I personally identified with this whole entire section of like, it made me feel seen of how I felt when I said the word perform. When I used that earlier, it goes into like the needing to the want to fit in goes deeper than wanting to be liked. It has to do with like racism, sexism, all those isms that she was talking about. And I thought it was, I just appreciated it. I just wanted to open up the floor. What were your thoughts on this section of the chapter when they're talking about authenticity and privilege? It made me think about how I have had in the past and still do sometimes have to code switch at work. When you think of the word professionalism and coworkers, not being blurred with friends, but I've had that situation where I felt like I had to be friends with coworkers, and that came to a toll for me because I wasn't my authentic self. I felt the need to fit in. It wasn't a whole mean girl situation, but it definitely for me was a privilege. I realize some people have the privilege to just be, themselves, and for me, I always felt like I had to be nicer. I had to speak softer. I always had to laugh and be unthreatening to people. And that's exhausting. I wasn't authentic in those work environments.
Yeah, and I guess to give people context who haven't read the chapter, so they're probably like, "What are you talking about? We're just talking about defense mechanisms." So it's a whole section on. It's called "Being Authentic in an Unequal World." So she was saying how in a perfect world we would all be loved in our most authentic form, but in the real world, privilege plays into whose authentic self is welcomed and who is rejected. That's what I mean by stereotypes and stuff. Is like she specifically is giving examples of having, as someone who is Black or non-white, having white friends and counterparts. She goes through like a lot of detailed examples of that. So kind of like the interracial dynamics in friendships. And so it was interesting. I kind of would have preferred this to be its own chapter. I feel like I kind of lumped it in here, which I kind of got confused. I was like, why are we here? Like, it's important. So that's why I'm like, I wish it was just a chapter of like having friends, making friends through differences or something. I feel like it could have just been its own thing.
I agree.
Because I kind of diluted it, because then at the end, then she tries to round it back. So it's very important, but it was interesting, the placement of this chapter. And she talks about like code switching being socio-linguistic labor, which I thought that was an interesting term. Because like code switching a lot of times is deemed as negative, but I have also heard from some, I guess, experts or sociologists saying like code switching also is like not necessarily negative. It's just a thing that can also just naturally occur. It's like when Filipino Americans like speak Taglish or something, like that's a form of code switching that doesn't have to necessarily be a negative thing. Like sometimes you do that in a way to kind of build that safety or whatever.
When I think of code switching in that positive way, I think of being when you feel safe and you can be your authentic self. You might talk a little bit different. You might speak another language because you're more comfortable doing that. But in the general public, to communicate to people who aren't amongst your family or group, you might need to speak, the most popular language, which is English. So I appreciate you bringing that point up, Tony.
Yeah. So it's like, there's different reasons and times that it might make more sense than others. Oh, hold on, this train is going back.
I don't really hear it.
Point. Oh, that's good. So another thing she's talking about when it comes to navigating these privileges and friendships is a section on page 160. It's called Building Friendship Across Differences. So I feel like that should have been its own chapter. Anyway.
Yes.
But she says the 3 V's comprise of components of healthy and intimate relationships across levels of privilege. So there's vet, vulnerability, and voice. So vetting involves choosing friends who believe in the worth and dignity of the disadvantaged group you identify with. Vulnerability involves bringing your full self to the friendship, which includes freely expressing your experiences related to being a member of a disadvantaged group. And voicing involves expressing concerns related to your group as they arise in friendship. So she had some great examples. She even mentioned a friend dynamic where one friend was living with a disability and the other friend didn't like really understand what that meant. So that caused tension in their group. And she talks about that situation and how the person with the disability was like, oh, this is literally like, I don't see where you guys are because I have low vision and you think I'm leaving you on purpose. And it's really because I'm differently abled and I just don't know where y'all are at. So it helped the other friend understand truly what the other friend was experiencing. Like, because again, we're all, living our own human experience. We only know our own experiences and we don't always think about where the other person is coming from. And so that's what she kind of talks about in the conflict resolution part is like, just if your friend is doing something that you don't understand, sometimes just open up to like, hey, why did this happen? Instead of blaming like, oh, every time you do this. So I thought that was important, especially when it comes to the privilege conversation of like, there's different privileges we all have, right? Whether that being able-bodied, a certain culture that's predominant, certain language, where we live in a region, our economic income status, different things will have one person in a friendship possibly have more privilege than the other. But I think it is important for us to assess like when those happen in a friendship. Again, she kind of talks about like, how harmful is it, right? Is it something that you can talk through with this friend? Or is it like, oh, this is bigger than me and I don't need this friend anymore? And again, I think many of us probably have experiences that during 2020 and the pandemic of realizing that like, actually, I don't need this in my life.
Yes, I asked myself these questions, y'all. The questions like, yes, get the book because these questions, when I reviewed them and thought about, I would say half of the friendships that I walked away from, I can confidently say they were harmful. I did not need to go back. But some of them I did realize I was being like, what was that one? The defense mechanisms. I wasn't able to tolerate tension and I withdrew instead of addressing the problem. So it was like half and half. But definitely I feel like the pandemic escalated some of those interracial friendships where I don't even like tension in general. Then you're going to add the other part on. I was like, so that's where it was harmful, that part.
Yeah. And I think in these chapters, we'll get into it more in chapter 6, but Dr. Franco talks about how like a lot of times friendships, they're deemed like, oh, they're easygoing, lighthearted. So whenever we get to these conflicts or these really tough situations, that's when we kind of freak out like, oh my God, it's not rainbows and butterflies. Then like, I must never talk to this person again. And she's like, there is gray area. There's a spectrum. There's different ways you can have this person in your life. So we'll get more into that next chapter, but I do appreciate how it really is just these 2 chapters have been really eye-opening, like how we show up as humans. And the questions you talked about, I want to just name them so people who don't have the book will have them. So page 168, they're questions to reflect on for people making friends across differences, right? So in what ways do I benefit from this friendship? In what ways does this friendship harm me? Is there something I can do to make this friendship less harmful? Example, have a difficult conversation, see this friend less often. Do I want to do that? And lastly, do I view the benefits of the friendship as outweighing the harm? So y'all can pause, journal, write down these questions, reflect on them to just kind of assess, the friends you have in your life that you realize there was some sort of tension or conflict? Like, is it worth resolving and moving forward? Or are you like, okay, this isn't what I need anymore?
That's a great segue too, Tony. Thank you for sharing those questions, those reflection questions. Again, y'all, this Soultry Hangout, our book club, is all about having a community discussion, and we hope that reading this book and talking with each other is going to help to nourish our minds, bodies, and souls, and so that we can have enriching friendships. And so with that said, like, knowing now, like, accepting that we're not perfect, accepting that there's going to be conflict, and knowing that's going to be a truth in maintaining friendships, I think it's important to harmonize with anger. And so the first quote that we're sharing to root us in this chapter: expressing anger is more likely to benefit a relationship than destroy it. Full stop there. Full stop, y'all. Did you hear that? Expressing anger is more likely to benefit than destroy it. Y'all, I was assuming the opposite.
Yeah, that's what she mentions in the book. Like, the author herself was saying that that's something she struggled in, that she, through her psychology grad program, PhD program, they had to take a whole assessment and see like what type of, I guess, psychological issues that they personally might have. And one of the things she talks about is suppression of anger is what came up on that assessment for her. And she was like, what, why is that a bad thing? Or like, why is that something I need to work on? She's like, as society, aren't we supposed to suppress it? So I appreciated her sharing her personal story too, of like realizing that anger isn't always bad, which goes into the next section we want to talk about, which is anger in versus anger out. And I think that's when we associate anger equals bad, we're talking about anger out.
Yes, that is the lashing out. That is the yelling. That is name calling. That is, I see red. And anger in is suppressing the anger, trying to control that emotion.
And she talks about how anger in and anger out seem to be on opposite ends of the spectrum, but they have more in common than it seems, and they evolve into each other. So she was saying how it's not like one is right and one is wrong. It's more so like, if you hold it in too long,
it's a symptom, y'all.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I appreciate. And she was saying that, like, if we keep not healthily expressing anger, that it will then, it leads to harm to both parties, to ourselves for not being able to show up authentically and voice our needs and our concerns and our feelings, and also for the other person, because either they're being lashed out at or being isolated, because then you become distant, or all these things that we'll get into this chapter. But I really appreciate that just simple distinction of anger in not necessarily being better. So let's all just take that in.
Right. Basically, y'all, it's unprocessed emotion. Unprocessed emotion is what we're talking about. Because people are like, oh, I don't get angry. I was like, or say, do you process your anger? Because I used to always say like, oh, I'm a happy person. I don't really let nothing bother me. I don't get angry. Lies. I don't allow myself. I don't give myself space to process that emotion. And that is what I'm working on, y'all. That's why this chapter, for me, I'm like, I want to harmonize. Hey, I want to harmonize. I want to harmonize with my anger, because I realize that I don't allow myself to process this emotion. This emotion, I'm like, I don't have it, but we do. It's a symptom. We do have it, and then there's symptoms that come with not allowing ourselves to process it. So, do you want to get into anger of hope versus anger of despair? Again, the fact that we're thinking of harmonizing, this chapter has so many layers, because I feel like a lot of times people say anger, I get it, but that's the anger out. So this anger of hope and anger despair, I appreciated these definitions to really understand, now, what does that look like? So anger of despair is the destructive force we typically associate with anger. Anger of hope, however, is a healing force that can deepen friendships and that we should embrace. I was like, wait, what? Anger of hope is a healing? It's healing to be angry. You know, y'all, when you think of like those breathwork classes, or those classes where they allow you to like speak out, yell out, I think of that, like embracing that healing force, that cathartic, which we'll get to later, of releasing.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's like I think in society, we just have normalized anger being bad. But again, this book and Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart, if we keep talking about it, so if y'all want to pick that up, you can watch our previous book club,
Last
go to our
September.
website, join our membership, and you can get that full access to all of our episodes because we go into all of these emotions there. But another thing I want to point out with this distinction of anger on page 175, she talks about how with anger we confuse conflict with combat. And so then we try to defend, offend, punish, destroy, or incite revenge, right? So that's that anger of despair. When she's talking about like that healing force of anger can really help us strengthen our friendships by just naming what we're feeling. It could be as simple as that, as just being like, I'm upset with XYZ thing. It doesn't have to like be a full-blown fight.
Like this emotion is coming up for me. Like, how do we separate? How do we acknowledge our emotions without tying it to our character? That's what I have to ask myself. Because I say I'm not an angry person. Like that's different than I'm experiencing this emotion of anger and I want to process it and do something about it. So with that, we're going to go into talking about conflict resolution. So the rest of this chapter is talking about the different layers of what it means to resolve conflict. And I really, again, y'all, this is like a kind of like a how to reflect. Like it talks about breaking up, opening up. There's all kinds of gems in this book, y'all.
Yeah. So with conflict resolution, yeah, she talks like literally the heading is to break up or open up. And, you know, a lot of her recommendations are open up and talk about it first. And then you'll figure out if it's, you know, worth keeping or leaving that friendship. So the quote I wanted to share is, the only litmus test for whether an issue is worthy of being addressed, right? So I feel like that's how a lot of anger starts brewing, is because we keep pushing down, suppressing these, you know, negative feelings, these experiences that upset us, that rubbed us the wrong way. And so she's sharing that, like, if you keep thinking about it, if it's something that is not sitting right with you, this is probably something you should address and work through with the person in the situation.
Yeah, I like that too. I like this all because she also talks about like what are things you can let go. So if something that only happened once, you can let it go, doesn't come up again. That's also a way to like conflict resolution, like resolve with self. Can I just let this go? Yes or no? And then move forward. And the other quote we wanted to share is like talking about like that she was talking about friendship versus romantic relationships, like how we approach conflict resolution in both can be different. And so in friendships, we often choose to endure a lifelong ache rather than getting surgery, dealing with 4 weeks of recovery and moving on, being happy and getting back your life. So I wanted to share that quote because a lot of times if we're unhappy in a friendship, we're like, she kind of bothers me, he kind of bothers me, they kind of bother me, but I'm just gonna avoid them. I'm just gonna be passive. I'm just gonna be withdraw. But in our intimate relationships, because we know this person's not going anywhere, I want to be with this person, we oftentimes will bring up conflicts to resolve them because of wanting to sustain the romantic relationship. Or even in familiar, because like familial relationships, like this is my sister, I gotta see her, so of course I'm gonna tell her how I feel because we have a whole collective together, you know. That's an example. But for a friend, because we have multiples, we're like, all right, they'll just have to miss me on that one. So I think it's important to also, if we're talking about platonic and we're using this book to like recalibrate the importance of platonic friendships, I think it's important to also see how we can, like how I guess the default can be, which is just to endure something that can easily be addressed, or to not endure it and let it go.
Yeah, and she mentions that. She says we suppress our anger and we don't tend to the problem until it's doomed, right? So she says conflict resolution, you want to bring stuff up as they're coming up so you can actually maintain that friendship and strengthen it versus you put it off in the back corner. You just be saying hi to people, even though you really feel like flustered and frustrated by them. And then later on, when you're assessing, you're like, how do I feel about this friend? It's already doomed because you've already now associated and now have this like festering interest brewing, like negative feelings towards this person. So I thought that was important too, because I'm the type of person that I do tend to like put things off, especially like I'll compartmentalize. I'm like, oh, I had a fad of mine. And I realized like through reading this chapter is like a reminder that's like, no, that's actually not helping at all. It's actually contributing to this conflict still happening and to repeat, right? Because also if you don't tell someone what's upsetting you, they're more likely to do that thing again versus you actually bring it up and then they have changed behavior. Yeah.
I think she also talked about compound, right? That compound effect. And I think that happens too. If we, for me, there's some friendships that I no longer have because it was the compound of the offense. And now that I reflect reading this chapter, I'm like, oh, what would have been like if I said something earlier and didn't let it fester? It really did. Like, this book had me feeling like, dang, like I want to be better.
Yeah, like she talks about like, like sometimes we can even like ghost friends, right? So we talk about ghosting a lot of romantic connections, but she's talking about, people can also ghost friends, or people end up demoting friends. So instead of like, oh, like that person you would call all the time to like help you plan your birthday party, now maybe, you just invite them to this other gathering that's not your intimate party anymore. And like, but you don't ever tell them
Yes,
what happened
y'all,
that made you stop messing with them in the same way, right? So again, it's like, I think with this book, she's also trying to share is that like, if you were to show up to make, so she's having you ask yourself, self-assess, would you show up this way in your romantic connection? And if you wouldn't, why do you allow yourself to settle for this dynamic within a friendship? Because she's like, if you just gonna have these awkward interactions, this weird coffee table talk when you really have some things you want to say to this person, like, would you date someone where you couldn't, every time you going on a date, you're kind of like, damn, he's really bothering me. They're really like, why would you go on a date with that person?
right?
So it's like in a friendship, why would you keep hanging out with someone or have them in your life if they're bothering you? And that made me really sit back and be like, oh, that's true. Because I wouldn't keep going on a date with someone that I really was bothered by.
And I feel like too, in romantic relationships, it's that compassion, like giving someone an opportunity to show up and meet your needs. I personally was like, do I give my friends an opportunity to fulfill my needs and what I would like in a friend? And my answer generally, no. So this really, y'all, it really made me feel, it made me take inventory on my actions.
Yeah, same. It's like it helps you give language to maybe situations we've experienced or we take part of, and like, to really be self-aware. And that's the first step, right? Is awareness. And that's how I feel with this book and this chapter specifically. Is just like holding a light up to see through, or putting, water in a container to see where the holes are, because there's some holes in the way that I be showing up in friendship, right? And I think it's because a lot of us are conditioned to like repress these things. So I think it's important through this book that we're learning that it's actually okay. And so that's this next quote I wanted to share. So on page 181, it shares that there are some things that we don't get over unless we talk about them. And that acknowledging anger can lead to a conversation that allows for the release of the residue of past hurts that haunts our otherwise beloved friendship. Anger can spur positive change in our friendships, but only if we know how to use it. I was like, wow, like that's so profound, is that like this residue of past hurts. And I think that's what we're talking about. Like it builds up because you're just like, oh, that one time they did this, but this other time, oh, every time they do. And it's just like, that's brewing that anger when we really can just talk about it, be vulnerable, which we talked about last week, so we can move past this, because it is a beloved relationship, right? And that's what she's saying, is to take inventory of like, if this person is really important for you. And one thing she said to ask yourself with friendships, if you want to sustain it, is like, what value or what does this person bring to you that no one else in your life does, right? So whether that's, oh, this person really understands my upbringing, where I came from, or this person, we have this shared interest and we always do this craft together, whatever it is. She's like, that can kind of remind you when these anger comes up that, there's still someone that you love deep down inside after all of those things that will help guide you and, motivate you to work through this. Like, it's hard, but, it takes work. Any relationship takes work. And I think, again, with society, we normalize, oh, you work hard for a romantic relationship, but for friendship, it should just be easy. It should be natural. And it's like, we're all humans. Like, we're all learning this as we go. Yeah.
Speaking of like taking inventory of our anger, or remembering past hurts when it comes to our friendships, the next thing we want to talk about is anger and how it is informed by our attachment style. Because I think it's really important, now that we've gotten this far in this book and in this chapter, you're probably thinking of things are probably coming up, right? Different scenarios, different friends that you've been able to communicate with or not is coming up. So you're probably wondering, like, where do I fall in this spectrum? So we're going to share that insecure people, like when it comes to anger, become overwhelmed by emotion during conflict because they confuse it with combat instead of reconciliation. I think you shared this earlier. So if you in your anger, if you tend to feel overwhelmed and it gets combative, that's usually coming from an insecure attachment style. And this is also helpful for us to detach ourselves, right? We don't have to identify. For me, I'm learning this section right now helped me to separate myself. Like, it's okay. Like, you don't have to, the whole, I'm not an angry person. No. When anger shows up, it shows up because of my attachment style. So another way for me, I really appreciate an opportunity to separate that characterization of self, my character, versus like what I'm experiencing based off of our attachment, how we're raised, our past experiences. And then secure people are collaborative, approaching conflict as a way to get both parties' needs met. They don't yell or blame, but instead acknowledge their anger as signaling a need and voice the need conveyed by the emotion. And also too, I want to share, y'all, if you we're all working to security. There was a quote earlier that was talking about that. Can I find it? Maybe not. But yeah, we're all working towards being more secure in our friendships, in our relationships. So for me, I do want to be able to, not yell or blame. I want to be able to use anger as a way to inform me when I need to voice my needs, when I need to further communicate or give someone an opportunity to help me process those emotions. And I feel like a lot of times I have tried to process anger, this emotion, by myself. And that the symptom of that is withdrawing. And so, yeah, this is a way for y'all to think. So think about your attachment style and think about how you've showed up or you've, I guess, processed anger, I guess.
And I was trying to find it in the book, but I can't find what page it was on or which chapter. But from today's readings, I remember she mentioned something in the book of like not associating like with your friend. Oh, what do you call it?
Oh,
not
yes,
associating your like worth with your friend. So like,
yes,
if you're going through a conflict with a friend, or if your friend brings up a conflict with you, it's like, hey, I want to talk to you about something. Something you did upset me, not now having this negative self-worth of like, oh, I'm such a bad person, or I'm such a bad friend. Like detaching yourself from that and just receiving this information, or knowing that like, okay, like I can have experienced this and maybe upset someone, or someone upset me, but that doesn't mean I'm a bad person or that they're a bad person. Like, so not attaching like behavior or like how you feel about the person to how that person is as a whole human. So I thought that was really interesting too, because I do feel like sometimes with friends, since we don't bring up the small issues, and all of a sudden we're like, oh yeah, I don't hang out with her anymore because, she just was a selfish friend or whatever. And it's like, okay, was she actually a selfish person, or these couple of scenarios she showed up in a way that was selfish, and you didn't really communicate that, so she wasn't able to kind of reconcile how you felt. Yeah.
I think that section, I think you're talking about the section of how to receive your friend's anger. I think that's a section. And I like what she said. If we view our friend's feedback not as a put down, but as an enlightenment opportunity, that's what we've been talking about, that opportunity, we can respond to their concern by appreciating their feedback. And that's going to help. That's going to help us become more secure. That's what I was trying to get at. It's like, if you're not there yet, is okay. There's a way to practice it. How do we practice being secure with a friend expressing like anger? Is to take the feedback, appreciate it. But also there's another part. She says, we don't have to agree with our friends' feelings to be responsive. And I think that's important. We don't have to agree with their feelings to be responsive, because half the time when people are angry, they just want to be heard. You know what? Customer service, it's like the person's like, I'm sorry this happened, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not trying to, I'm using this example to like broad stroke, like to give an example, because it's way more deeper than that with our friends, right? But yeah, that was for me. I needed to hear that. I don't have to agree with the friend's feelings to be responsive, because I would find myself not honoring myself in an argument. I just want it to be over. Okay, I'm sorry. But they said a secure person won't back down. They'll be like, no, I still. And so it's like that's the authenticity. It's like honoring yourself in an argument. Harmonizing anger. When I think harmonizing anger, two people can be mad at each other. That's the harmony.
Yeah.
And
go ahead. I was going to say, I was just going to like mention the different subtopics just so everyone kind of knows what we journey through with this chapter. So in the section of how to communicate anger in our friendships, we talk about calm your feelings, right? So she said sometimes you might need to step away. Maybe they really like said something that offended you. So maybe you need to take a moment, you know, vent to another person, vent to your therapist. And when you're calm, come back to the conversation, right? That's how we make sure that we're not doing anger out, because you're not just reacting to what upset you, but maybe you take time. And then we prime your friend for constructive conflict. So I started that because that's something that I really appreciate, is when someone tells me like, hey, I have something on my mind I want to talk about. Like, do you have the capacity? Do you have the time to talk about this thing? Because I feel like a lot of times I end up like bombarded with a negative conversation, or like someone wanting to conflict resolve something with me. But they don't prime me. And I be having a lot going on in my life, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And so sometimes I'm just thrown off. And then for me, then I retract and withdraw, because I'm just like, yo, like I don't even have the capacity to do this right now. But maybe if that friend would have told me, hey, do you have time? I could be like, oh, actually today is like not a great day, but like how about tomorrow or 2 days or whenever. I think for me, that's also important in being compassionate to the other and understanding where your friend is at, is not just centering yourself of like, oh, I have this on my chest, I need to tell them right now. Like maybe that's not the best time to have this conversation, because maybe your friend's not going to receive that well right there. Or maybe you want to inform them so they can reflect too, because sometimes I think it's helpful for both parties to reflect before a conversation is had, because if only you know everything you want to talk about, all the times that they've, you know, transgressed you, and like they have no time to reflect, then they might be silent, or they might not have anything to contribute, and you might not feel like it's been a beneficial conversation because they didn't have the time to reflect, because maybe this is the first time they're realizing.
And that's what she also brings up. She also brings up that conflict is not like a one and done. Like the conversation can be ongoing, especially if it continues to bother you. So I feel like that's important to know too, as a person who's learning how to harmonize with my anger, a person who's trying to be more about conflict resolution than avoiding tension and being avoidant. Just understanding that certain things will take time to converse, because you want to be fair and allow the person to respond, like Tony's saying. And Rio shares, I think that's why I'm afraid of being that person to bring up the issues, because I don't want to push that person away. That's why I can definitely relate to that, Rio. And that's why the page 184, what Tony's talking about, walking us through how to communicate anger and friendships is very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I really also feel that, Rio, because yeah, you're kind of like, how do I bring this up? Because like I don't want them to think that, you know, like I hate them, but like it's also something that's clearly, you know, important to me. So it's like, yeah, navigating that. And so the next thing she talks about is like how to communicate anger is share your world, right? So you don't want to just you
You
want to
are.
focus on how your friend's behavior impacted you. So you want to talk about how, you know, I statements like I felt, not projecting like, oh, you did this to me, because again, we all have different things going on. So more so talk about how it's impacting you. And then ask for your friend's perspective, right? So what was going on for you
them.
at that time? So they can have a chance to talk about what they were going through, because maybe they were so busy with work they didn't even realize, you know, it was your premiere party or something, so they totally forgot to come because they're so busy, right? Maybe it's not that they hate you now and they never want to come to your work events. You know, it's like I feel like a lot of times, you know, as humans we can like be extreme, and like one little thing we're like, oh, now they don't want to be my friend. And so I appreciate that she's talking about just ask for their perspective, because sometimes, you know, we're all human, there's just different things happening. And she talks about like, don't make the issue your fault, but own the part that you played a role. She's like saying, right, it takes two in every relationship, and we can acknowledge multiple truths. And I thought that was important. So we can be upset by a problem and unknowingly add to it. And I think that's something that we all probably can sit with, is like, oh yeah, like I can be upset, but realize that I did play a role in how this turned out or how this person ended up, you know, responding to me. And the next thing we can do is soothe our triggers, right? So we will be triggered. We're humans. So self-soothing. And one thing she mentioned was picturing yourself splitting into two selves during a conflict. So there's one part of you that's observing, and the one part of you that's experiencing the conflict with your friend. And so, yeah, you can read in the book like more exactly how she talks about that. But I appreciate that she gave a tip. And then, of course, de-escalate. So if, you know, you don't want to show up with anger out, so like, you know, calm down, de-escalate. If someone is being defensive, as you say, you can like try to steer the conversation of like, oh, like we statements, like how do we come to a solution?
Co-regulating.
Yeah. And so like to not, if someone's popping off on you, don't just pop off on them, to kind of try to reel it in. Or even sometimes just take a break. Be like, okay, maybe we need to like have this conversation, revisit it in a future date.
I like this part. Admit when they have a point.
Yeah, a lot of people don't like to do that.
You're like, you got a good point. You got a good point.
That's true. That's true, right? Because maybe they're like, oh, you never told me going to, you know, your child's recital was important. And then you could be like, oh, that's true. I never said that to you. In the future, I would love for you to come to XYZ place, right? So it's just, you know, realizing that, again, we're human. We all will make mistakes. So that doesn't mean we're terrible people. It just means we're human.
Yeah, and the last one, she says to ask for the behavior you want to see in the future. And that's what you were saying, Tony, too. Oh, okay. Well, you know, in the future, I would like, you know, could you, I appreciate if next time. Yeah. So y'all, Marisa G. Franco, Dr. Marisa G. Franco walks us through some steps, and I'm definitely going to apply these. Let us know in the comments if the section about communicating anger in our friendships was helpful. Will you be using this framework in the future conflict resolution moments in your life?
Yeah, I feel like it was really helpful to have it spelled out, especially since this is something that like I struggle with in my friendships. So to have this as a resource to like come back to be like, okay, this is like something I can work through, I think will be really helpful. It's, I mean, helpful for me now, but I feel like in the future it'll be also helpful to kind of just reflect on. And as we round out this chapter, towards the end, she talks about finding catharsis. So she talks about in this chapter, we've learned that the purpose of anger is to drive reflection, to sharpen our sense of our needs, right? So instead of suppressing our needs, our wants, our desires, and friendships, anger is a way that we can communicate that to, right, the people that we love, the people that we care about, the people who we want in our lives. And I thought that was a great reminder, right, that like conflict is normal in friendship. It shouldn't be happening all the time, right? Because maybe that's meaning there's some sort of disconnect or discord, or maybe we can show up differently, or we can ask them to show up differently, right? But it's okay when it comes up.
No, I agree. I think it's like, it's the acceptance of this is a part of, for me, the catharsis in like finding catharsis in anger is accepting this is a part of communication. Like conflict resolution is a part of healthy communication.
Right.
Processing the emotion of anger is a healthy force. They said a healing force, y'all. Anger is a healing force. And I've never thought about it like that. So it's literally shifting my mindset and how I'm going to associate when I feel the emotion of anger. You know? So I'm feeling cathartic right now.
Yeah, and I feel like with anger, right, when it shows up, again, she says it's reflection. It can help us be more self-aware, like, oh, I actually don't like when someone does that. So we can be aware of our own needs and to advocate for ourselves, right? Like as humans, as adults, like making these friends, like it's okay if we didn't know some of these things would bother us, right? Like I think that's what you're trying to share. That's like it's normal for even something that you're okay with before to now bother you, and for you to communicate that with another person. So I appreciate that too.
You know what other book? Y'all, it's so interesting how all the books we read literally are in conversation with each other. This brings me back, y'all, to set boundaries, find peace. Right? Set boundaries, find peace. So the catharsis of, you know, this reflection of the purpose of anger and how we can navigate it to enrich our friendships, that's a part of boundaries, setting boundaries. You know, so hard stop when you get angry, full stop, hold up, pause. There's a boundary being crossed, right?
Exactly. And with catharsis, she says that it doesn't have to be found, catharsis doesn't have to be found by unleashing what's bad. It can be reached by adding what's good, right? So again, when we're talking about anger, it's not just poo-pooing your friends and stuff. It's no, adding, again, that conflict resolution, the resolve aspect is, this is what I enjoy about friendship. Oh, I loved when we used to do this, or can we do more of this? Like, I appreciate when you did this for me. I need this kind of support, right? I think once we have that self-awareness and can communicate that healthy to our friends, then that's when that good comes, right? So I appreciate how this chapter was able to kind of help us journey through that. And I'm sure a lot of us will still have to sit with this, revisit it, and that's okay. That's why we have the book club, because it's a journey, y'all. We're not perfect. We're learning too with all of you. But I just want to share last two quotes to kind of round out how this anger chapter, kind of what I feel like she really wanted to emphasize. So connection is threatened by unhealthy peace, as it is by unhealthy conflict, right? So keeping the peace and not wanting to disturb the peace. You don't want to be ludicrous, but we have to sometimes, okay? To be good friends, to show up in our friendships fully, authentically, to be vulnerable. Because if we're just not sharing anything, like, are we really authentic with that friend, right? Is this really that deep of a friendship if you're not willing to go there to share what's real with you?
Are we really at peace if we're avoiding our authentic emotion? That's my question to myself. Am I really at peace if I'm avoiding my authentic emotions, my inner thoughts? And then we talk, and then this next quote, I'll let you go because I got something.
Yeah. So the last quote we want to share is, our relationships are the most important aspects of our lives. They deserve our painstaking effort, our highest selves.
Our highest selves. We didn't talk too much about that, but we talked the chapter of authenticity talked about true self. And to be your true self there's a difference between true self and highest self, right? So I think the highest self is when we're able to honor our authentic self while also honoring others. I think when I think of highest self as not just true self, it's the self mirrored to others in consideration of others.
Yeah. I think when I think of our highest selves, I think of kind of that, you know, what's in you is what's in me, right? That
Right.
spiritual aspect of like, okay, if this is important to me, then I'll think of about, your needs because that's important for, the good of the community,
Mhm.
the good of humanity.
Yeah. When I think of highest self too, I think of it's coming up for me now. I'm losing it. Like trying to reduce the harm. Like there's a lot of pain and harm that can happen with like, and so I think with our highest selves, it goes back to that one quote of being able to be charming, being where is that? It's earlier. I'm scrolling up, but it's being able to be in that state of being charming and
Mm-hmm.
here I'm gonna find it. Okay, at our most authentic core, we are kind, loving, charming, and considerate. We don't
Mm-hmm.
need to be anyone but ourselves to make friends. That is the last quote we want to leave you with, y'all. Page
Mm-hmm.
145. I'm going to put it on the things we could put it in the on the screen because it's very important you know this, that we leave you with this. At our most authentic core, we are kind, loving, charming, and considerate.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to be anyone but ourselves to make friends.
Mm-hmm.
That's really how I want to be. I want to be able to be myself and make friends.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. So let us know in the comments how chapters 5 and 6 resonated with y'all. If you have any other highlights and takeaways that you want to share with us, if there's something that you felt we didn't cover that you thought was really important from these 2 chapters, and if there's any other questions that you have that we'll get to next week. If you are also watching the replay, feel free to comment, and then we'll comment back. Yeah, so this was a great section. I feel like part 3, it really got to the nitty gritty of what
Yes,
friendships can entail.
it really did. And Shanta shares, I've been so frightened by anger early on that confronting conflict brings out the avoidant attachment in me. So
Mm-hmm.
this chapter helped me see anger in a different light that I can use.
Mm-hmm.
Me too.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing, for being vulnerable, for sharing space with us, for sharing your insights, your experiences. We really love it when you all are interactive. It helps us remember other parts of the book that we didn't think to highlight through the quotes and the sections. But that's why these other quotes came up because we're like, oh my God, like that brought up this or that. So we love when you all are interactive. Yeah.
Then Rio shares, thank you for the info. My biggest takeaway is how I tend to ghost friendships. And allowing anger to come from a place of love and deepen the friendship. Thank you for sharing, everyone. Thank you for engaging with us. We want to remind you that September is all about friendships. So definitely give us a follow on all social media platforms. Be a friend and subscribe. Share our work with folks. Donate and support what we do here. We'd love to continue to bring y'all more book clubs, and we got some in person. Tony will be on the West Coast, the best coast in October, y'all. We're gonna have our twerk or treat, sweat social. We're gonna have our the premiere of Out of the Boondocks season screening, and we're also gonna have Soul Flow. So if you want to continue to engage with us in the virtual space, you're like, I'm not going to be in San Diego, your opportunity to commune with us and mindfully move with us is going to be joining our Soul Flow classes, which are on Sundays at 9 a.m. PST. Check our website for the schedule.
Yeah, so go to our website, soultrysisters.com, and you can donate to us at Soultry Sisters on our Venmo and PayPal. We love doing this for you all, but your support and your donations help us keep sustaining ourselves to keep doing this for you all. So go to our website, soultrysisters.com/book club to learn more. And again, message us or DM us with your next book club recommendations, and we'll take that in consideration for our next series. So we'll see you all next week, and we'll cover chapters 7 and 8 as we close out the book. So don't miss it. And if you missed any of the other episodes, catch the replays on our YouTube channel at Soultry Sisters. And we'll see you all then. Bye.